When my son died, his wife inherited the house and $25 million, and then kicked me out, saying, "You're not welcome here anymore. Go die in the trash." But a few days later, the lawyer laughed and said, "Did you listen carefully to the will? What was in the will caused my daughter-in-law to faint from shock. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now." The mahogany casket gleamed under the gray Texas sky, threatening rain that hadn't come yet. 37 people stood around my son's grave, their black clothes making them look like crows against the spring grass. I held Jeffrey's third-grade school photo in my weathered hands, the edges soft from years of touching. My boy was gone, 45 years old, and the cancer took him anyway. Zella positioned herself at the head of the casket, playing the grieving widow perfectly. Her black designer dress probably cost more than most folks here made in a month. Those manicured nails, painted dark red, rested on the polished wood like she owned it, like she owned everything. The minister was halfway through his speech about eternal rest when she moved. Her high heels clicked against the cemetery stones as she approached me, that calculated sympathy painted across her face. "Clyde," she whispered, but loud enough for Mrs. Henderson and the Johnsons to hear. Her perfectly manicured hand touched my arm. "I hope you don't think you'll be staying in my house after this." The words hit like ice water. Several mourners shifted uncomfortably, pretending they hadn't heard. But they had. Everyone had. I gripped Jeffrey's photograph tighter, feeling my jaw muscle tense. "This is my son's home, Zella." "Was your son's home." Her voice carried that sweet venom she'd perfected. "Now it's mine." Jeffrey left everything to his loving wife. Mrs. Henderson gasped softly behind her gloved hand. Obie Smith stepped closer, his weathered face hardening. These people had known Jeffrey since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. They'd watched him build his construction empire from nothing. "We haven't heard the will yet," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady despite the fire building in my chest. Zella laughed. Actually laughed at my son's funeral. "What's to hear? I'm his wife. Who else would he leave millions to?" The minister paused mid-sentence, clearly uncomfortable. Folks were staring now, some looking away in embarrassment. This was supposed to be about Jeffrey, about honoring his memory. Instead, this woman was turning it into her personal show. "The deceased was a generous man," the minister continued, trying to regain control of the service. "A pillar of our community a pillar who knew how to take care of his family," Zella interrupted, smiling at me with those cold blue eyes. "His real family." That's when I understood. This wasn't grief-talking or even greed. This was strategy. She'd planned this moment, chosen this public setting where I couldn't respond the way my blood demanded, where she could establish her narrative in front of witnesses. The minister finished his prayer while dirt began falling on Jeffrey's casket. Each shovelful felt like another piece of my heart breaking. But Zella's smirk, that triumphant little smile as she watched my face, that was burning itself into my memory. She returned to her widow performance, accepting condolences from people who'd known Jeffrey since childhood, playing the grieving wife while the real grief, mine, got shoved aside like yesterday's newspaper. As they lowered my boy into Texas soil, I made myself a promise. Whatever game Zella thought she was playing, she'd picked the wrong opponent. The rain finally started as the last shovelful hit wood. As the crowd dispersed toward their cars, I stayed behind. The gravediggers had finished their work, and Jeffrey's temporary marker stood crooked in the fresh dirt. I placed my single red rose on the mound, the same variety his mother had grown in our garden 30 years ago. Zella's laughter carried from across the cemetery, where she held court with a group of mourners, probably spinning her sob story about the poor widow's burden. The wind caught my gray hair, and arthritis sent familiar aches through my hands as I stared at that school photograph. Jeffrey at 8 years old, gap-toothed grin and cowlick that never would lie flat. When had that bright-eyed boy become the hollow-cheeked man I'd visited in that Houston hospital room? March 2023. MD Anderson Cancer Center. The smell of antiseptic couldn't hide the fear in that place. Jeffrey had lost 40 pounds by then, his expensive suits hanging loose on his shrinking frame. The experimental treatments weren't working, but he kept fighting, always fighting. "Dad, I want you to know, I took care of you," he'd said that day, gripping my hand with fingers that felt like bird bones. Whatever happens, you're protected. I hadn't understood then. Figured he meant the life insurance, maybe some savings account. Jeffrey had always been responsible, even as a kid saving pennies in mason jars. But watching him struggle through those final months, I saw something else. Fear. Not of dying. Jeffrey wasn't afraid of much, but fear of leaving things unfinished, leaving people unprotected. The memory shifted backward 20 years earlier. Jeffrey, at 25, standing in what would become his first office, a rented space above Murphy's hardware store, with a folding table for a desk and dreams bigger than Texas itself. "I'll never be poor like we were, Dad," he'd promised, working 16-hour days to turn that $5,000 loan into something real. Building subdivisions across 3 counties, creating jobs, making families happy in homes his company constructed. Success came fast once it started. First million at 35, 10 million by 40, but the work never stopped. Jeffrey drove himself like a man possessed, chasing something I never quite understood. Maybe chasing away the memory of government cheese and second-hand clothes, of watching his mother count pennies at the grocery store. The photograph trembled in my arthritic hands. That last coherent conversation in February, 3 days before the end. Jeffrey's voice barely a whisper, but his words sharp with urgency. "She's not who I thought she was, Dad. Zella, I figured it out too late. Son, you're tired. The medicine, the will, I made sure you're protected. Promise me you'll fight if you need to." I'd promised, not knowing what I was promising. Figured it was the medication talking or pain making him paranoid. Jeffrey died believing I understood, and I'd failed him in that final moment. Now, standing over his grave while his wife celebrated 50 yards away, those words felt like prophecy. Money hadn't saved him. All those years building wealth, sacrificing health and time and peace of mind, and cancer took him anyway. The cruel irony burned worse than Zella's threats, but Jeffrey had been smart, smarter than his old man gave him credit for. Those final months while fighting for his life, he'd been fighting for mine too. I tucked the photograph into my jacket pocket as Zella's voice carried across the cemetery. "Well, it's time to discuss practical matters." She was approaching with her group of witnesses, probably planning another public humiliation. My grip tightened around that school photo, feeling its soft edges press into my palm. Whatever Jeffrey had planned, whatever protection he'd promised, I was going to need it soon. The rain was coming down harder now, and Zella's designer shoes would be getting muddy. Good. Let her struggle with something, even if it was just walking across wet grass. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward my old Ford pickup. Car doors were slamming across the parking area, engines starting, people eager to escape the awkwardness Zella had created at the graveside. She intercepted me halfway to my truck, her designer heels clicking on the wet pavement. Mrs. Henderson, Joe from First National Bank, and 3 other mourners flanked her like a jury she'd assembled. Strategic positioning, I recognized it from my Army days. "Clyde, you need to understand reality." Zella planted herself directly in my path, those cold blue eyes locked on mine. Jeffrey left everything to me. The house, the business, the investments, all of it. Her confidence was absolute. This wasn't bluffing or wishful thinking. She knew something the rest of us didn't, and she was enjoying the revelation. I kept my voice level, the way you do with spooked livestock. "We haven't heard the will yet, Zella." "What's to hear? I'm his wife." Her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Did you think he'd leave millions to someone who never contributed a dime to his success?" The witnesses shifted uncomfortably. Joe cleared his throat and studied his shoes. Mrs. Henderson clutched her purse tighter, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. But they stayed. That was the point of this little theater, creating witnesses to her dominance, establishing the narrative before anyone could challenge it. "I know this is hard," she continued, tilting her head with practiced sympathy. "But you can't live in denial. Jeffrey loved you, but he was practical. He knew I'd need everything to maintain the lifestyle he built for us." The cruelty was breathtaking. Not just the words, but the timing, the public setting, the witnesses she'd gathered to watch my humiliation. This woman had studied pain like other people studied recipes. "Everything all right here, Clyde?" Obadiah Smith approached from the direction of his old Chevy, reading the tension like weather signs. At 68, Obi was still built like the farmer he'd been, with hands that could gentle a frightened horse or stop a charging bull. 30 years of friendship had taught him to recognize trouble, and Zella was trouble in a designer dress. "Just discussing practical matters," Zella said, her irritation at the interruption flickering across her face before the mask slipped back into place. "Practical matters can wait," Obi said quietly, positioning himself slightly between us. "Man deserves time to grieve his son." "Of course he does." Zella's smile was razor-thin. "That's exactly why I'm inviting everyone to the house for refreshments. A proper memorial gathering." This was news to me. Jeffrey would have wanted something simple, quiet. But Zella was rewriting his story in real time, making herself the generous hostess instead of the vulture picking over his bones. "That sounds lovely," Mrs. Henderson said, clearly relieved to have something normal to focus on. "Jeffrey would have appreciated that." The others murmured agreement, accepting the invitation without question. Zella's smile widened as she watched them fall into line, establishing herself as the proper host of Jeffrey's memory. "You'll come too, won't you, Clyde?" Her tone was silk over steel. "It's important that family be there." Family. The word was an insult wrapped in courtesy, delivered in front of people who'd known me since before Jeffrey was born. She was daring me to refuse, to look petty and difficult in front of the community. "Something's not right about this," Obi murmured, stepping closer so only I could hear. His farmer's instincts were sharper than most folks realized, but the others were already heading toward their cars, talking about what dishes they'd bring and how Jeffrey would have loved seeing everyone together. Zella had successfully hijacked my son's memory, turning his funeral into her coronation. "I'll see you at the house," she said, triumph glittering in those blue eyes. "After all, it's still your son's house for now." The emphasis on "for now" was deliberate, another small cruelty delivered with surgical precision. She climbed into Jeffrey's Mercedes, her Mercedes now, and pulled away, leading the caravan of mourners to what had been my home for the past 3 years. I stood in the cemetery parking lot, rain soaking through my jacket, watching taillights disappear down the main road. The funeral was over, but something else was beginning. Obi waited beside his truck, engine running but not leaving. "You coming, old friend?" I looked back at Jeffrey's grave one more time, then climbed into my pickup. Whatever Zella had planned for this memorial gathering, I wasn't going to face it alone. The 15-minute drive to the house felt like heading into battle, which I supposed it was. Cars pulled into the circular driveway one after another, gravel crunching under tires as we arrived at the Wells family home. Zella had beaten us here, of course, her Mercedes already parked prominently near the front steps. She emerged before most of us had even shut off our engines, suddenly energized in a way that made my skin crawl. "Please, everyone come inside for refreshments." Her voice carried across the driveway with theatrical projection. "I've prepared a proper memorial gathering for Jeffrey." I climbed out of Obi's truck slowly, my arthritic joints protesting after the long day. Something felt wrong about this whole situation. We hadn't planned any memorial gathering. In fact, Jeffrey would have hated all this fuss. "Since when did she plan a memorial?" Obi muttered under his breath, matching my pace toward the house. The Victorian mansion looked the same as always. White columns, wraparound porch, the climbing roses my late wife had planted 40 years ago. But Zella stood on those front steps like she owned every brick and board, which, according to what we'd just witnessed, she probably did. Mrs. Henderson raised her eyebrows at me as we approached. "Clyde, dear, did you know about this gathering?" "No, ma'am. This is news to me." Zella heard us talking and turned that practiced smile our direction. "I wanted Jeffrey's friends to have a proper chance to remember him. Surely you don't object to honoring your son's memory?" The way she phrased it made any objection sound selfish. Clever woman, this daughter-in-law of mine. Manipulative as a snake oil salesman, but clever. We filed into the house I'd called home for 3 years, the place where Jeffrey had been born, where his mother had died, where 3 generations of Wells men had lived and worked and loved. Now it belonged to someone who'd known Jeffrey less than 2 years. That's when I noticed the setup. Tables had been arranged in the dining room, covered with white linens I'd never seen before. Good china was set out, not the everyday dishes, but the wedding set that had been Jeffrey's mother's. Wine glasses sparkled under the chandelier, and expensive-looking bottles were already opened and breathing. This level of preparation didn't happen in the hour between the funeral and now. "She planned this," I whispered to Obi as we hung our coats in the front hall. "Before the funeral even ended," he agreed, his farmer's eyes taking in every detail. "Look at those flowers. Those aren't grocery store arrangements. Someone ordered these days ago." Zella swept through the rooms like a hostess born to the role, directing people to the living room, offering drinks, discussing the wine selection with authority. Every gesture screamed ownership, possession, control. "Please make yourselves comfortable," she said, gesturing toward Jeffrey's favorite armchair, the leather recliner where he'd spent his final months when the treatments made him too weak to work. "I'll bring everyone something to drink." Joe from the bank accepted a glass of red wine that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "This is quite thoughtful, Zella. You prepared all this today?" Jeffrey always said hospitality was important. She poured herself a generous glass, her hands steady as a surgeon's. He would have wanted his friends to remember this day properly. Remember it properly, as if the funeral hadn't been enough, as if she needed to stamp her ownership all over Jeffrey's memory too. The doorbell rang, cutting through the murmur of conversation. Zella's eyes lit up immediately, and she practically bounced toward the front door. "That must be Mr. Thompson," she announced to the room, her excitement barely contained. "Now we can take care of the formal matters." Jasper Thompson entered carrying his official document case, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes finding mine across the room. Something flickered there, a look I couldn't quite read, but it made my pulse quicken. The real business was about to begin. 23 people settled into the living room, finding seats on sofas, chairs, and anywhere else they could manage. The formal atmosphere felt heavy as tomb air. Jasper Thompson positioned himself near the fireplace, removing official documents from his leather briefcase with practiced efficiency. Zella claimed the wingback chair closest to the lawyer, smoothing her black dress and adjusting her pearl necklace. I took the corner chair near the window, the spot where I'd sat countless evenings watching Jeffrey work at his laptop. "I'll now read the last will and testament of Jeffrey Michael Wells," Thompson began, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. The room fell completely silent, except for the soft rustle of papers. Dated February 10th, 2025. Witnessed and notarized according to Texas state law. Zella's foot began tapping against the oriental rug. Her fingers drummed against the chair arm. The woman could barely contain herself. Thompson continued with the standard legal language: declarations of sound mind, revocation of previous wills, appointment of executor. Boring stuff that made Mrs. Henderson shift in her seat and Joe check his watch. "To my loyal employees at Wells Construction, I leave 1 month's additional salary to be distributed equally among all current staff members." Thompson's voice remained steady, professional. "To my cousin Sarah in Houston, I leave my mother's jewelry collection. To the Willow Creek Public Library, I leave $50,000 for renovation of the children's section." Small gifts, charitable donations, personal items scattered among various relatives. Standard will material that made Zella's impatience grow more obvious by the minute. "When does he get to the important parts?" she stage whispered, loud enough for half the room to hear. Thompson cleared his throat and turned to a new page. The room held its collective breath. "To my beloved wife, Zella Marie Wells, I leave the family home located at 847 Magnolia Street, along with its contents, and the sum of $25 million from my investment accounts." Zella shot up from her chair like she'd been launched. "I knew it. I knew Jeffrey took care of me properly." The guests' reactions were mixed. Some smiled politely. Others looked uncomfortable with her enthusiasm. Mrs. Henderson exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband. Even in grief, there were certain social boundaries most people observed. I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling the wood grain press into my palms. $25 million plus the house. Jeffrey had been generous with his wife. I'd give him that. "What about—" I cleared my throat, hating that I had to ask. "What do I receive?" Thompson's eyes found mine across the room, and something passed between us, a look that said more than words could. "To my father, Clyde Samuel Wells, I leave all personal mementos, family photographs, and his tools from the workshop. The silence stretched like taffy. Tools and photographs. After helping build Jeffrey's empire, after 3 years of living under this roof, after a lifetime of love and sacrifice, tools and photographs. Zella's smile could have powered the whole county. She turned to face the room like a queen addressing her subjects, accepting congratulations from neighbors who'd known Jeffrey since he was in diapers. "Jeffrey always said he'd take care of me," she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. "He was such a thoughtful husband." Mrs. Henderson nodded politely. "Well, dear, you're certainly set for life now." "More than set." Zella's laugh had sharp edges. "I'll never have to worry about anything again." I remained seated while she held court, watching this performance with growing clarity. This woman had never loved my son. She'd seen a meal ticket, a lifestyle, a fortune to inherit. And Jeffrey, brilliant Jeffrey, had figured it out too late. But as the congratulations continued and wine glasses clinked, Thompson caught my eye again. He was packing his documents, but he moved slowly, deliberately, and when our eyes met, he gave the slightest nod toward the kitchen. "There is one additional clause," he said quietly, his words nearly lost in the celebration. "But that requires private discussion." Zella was too busy accepting praise to notice, but I heard, and for the first time since the funeral began, something that felt almost like hope stirred in my chest. The formal reading was over, but apparently the real business was just beginning. Guests moved from the living room toward the dining area, drawn by the elaborate spread Zella had mysteriously prepared. Crystal wine glasses caught the evening light streaming through tall windows, and the good silver gleamed on white linens. This wasn't thrown together in an afternoon. This was orchestrated. Zella raised her glass high, commanding attention like a conductor before an orchestra. To Jeffrey, who always took care of those he loved most. The irony wasn't lost on me, even if it sailed over everyone else's heads. She'd just inherited $25 million, while I got a box of tools and some family photos. Jeffrey's definition of those he loved most apparently had some interesting nuances. "This wine is exceptional," commented Dr. Miller, swirling the burgundy liquid. "What vintage is this, Zella?" 2012 Bordeaux. Jeffrey always said life's too short for cheap wine." She moved through the room with fluid grace, playing hostess like she'd been born to money. I wanted his friends to remember this day properly. Mrs. Henderson accepted a delicate crystal glass, studying Zella with newfound interest. "You managed to prepare all this today? After the funeral and everything? When you love someone, you find the strength." Zella's smile was camera perfect. Jeffrey would have wanted his friends to celebrate his life, not just mourn his death. Celebrate was an interesting word choice for a funeral reception. Most folks called these things memorial services, but Zella seemed determined to reframe Jeffrey's death as her personal triumph. "You know," she said, settling beside Mrs. Henderson on the velvet sofa, "I've always wanted to modernize this old place. Maybe open up some walls, update the kitchen." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly. "But it's such a historic home, dear. Been in the Wells family for 3 generations." "Well, it's my family now." Zella's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "And frankly, all this dark wood and heavy furniture feels so dreary. I'm thinking light colors, contemporary furniture, maybe knock out that wall between the kitchen and dining room." My knuckles went white around my wine glass. This house had been in our family since 1923. My grandfather built those walls with his own hands, selected every piece of molding, planned every room. Jeffrey had been born in the upstairs bedroom, taken his first steps on these very floors. But Zella saw dollar signs and design opportunities. Joe from the bank leaned forward with professional interest. "Will you be staying in Willow Creek long term, or might you be thinking of relocating?" Zella's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Actually, I'm considering selling and moving somewhere more cosmopolitan, maybe Dallas, or even New York." The room went dead quiet. These people had known Jeffrey his entire life, watched him build his business here, create jobs for their children, support local charities. The idea of selling his family home to fund Zella's urban adventure hit them like cold water. "Jeffrey loved this house," I said quietly. "He was born here." Zella turned toward me with theatrical surprise, as if she'd forgotten I was present. Jeffrey's dead, Clyde. It's time to live for the living, don't you think? The mask slipped completely then. No more grieving widow, no more thoughtful hostess. Just cold calculation wrapped in designer clothes. Besides, she continued, warming to her theme, what's the point of keeping the museum when you could have millions in cash? I could travel, buy a penthouse, really live for the first time in years. Obi stepped closer to me, his weathered face hard as granite. I could feel him fighting the urge to say something that would get us both thrown out. Mrs. Henderson began gathering her purse, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken. Well, I should be getting home. Early morning tomorrow. Others followed her lead, making polite excuses and heading toward the door. Within 20 minutes, Jeffrey's memorial reception had cleared out like smoke in a windstorm. Folks who'd intended to stay all evening suddenly remembered pressing obligations. I remained in my corner chair, watching this exodus with fascination. Zella had managed to alienate Jeffrey's entire social circle in one evening. These people had come to honor my son's memory, and instead they'd gotten a front-row seat to his widow's greed. By 8 o'clock, only Obi and I remained. Zella stood in the suddenly quiet dining room, surveying the abandoned wine glasses and half-eaten appetizers with confusion. Well, I suppose people have busy lives, she said, but uncertainty flickered across her face for the first time all day. Obi squeezed my shoulder as he headed for the door. Call me if you need anything, old friend. And I mean anything. The front door closed with a solid thunk, leaving Zella and me alone in the house that had been my home for 3 years. She turned to face me with renewed confidence, clearly relieved to drop the public performance. Finally, she said, kicking off her expensive heels, now we can discuss your situation properly. Sound of car engines faded into the distance, leaving only the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Zella moved through the kitchen like she'd lived here her entire life, humming some tune I didn't recognize while she stacked dirty dishes with practiced efficiency. Well, that went better than I expected, she said, not bothering to look at me as she scraped leftover appetizers into the garbage disposal. Her jewelry caught the overhead light, diamond earrings that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. I sat at the kitchen table, where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 3 years, watching this performance with growing fascination. The woman moved with complete ownership, opening cabinets like she'd memorized their contents, finding the good dishwashing liquid without searching. Zella, we need to discuss what happens next. She didn't turn around, just continued loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. What happens next? That's simple enough. When she finally faced me, her expression had shifted into something harder, more calculating. The grieving widow mask was completely gone now, replaced by cold business efficiency. Next, you pack your belongings and find somewhere else to live. The words hit like physical blows, even though I'd been expecting them. This house has been in my family for 4 generations, Zella. Was in your family. She snapped the dish towel with sharp emphasis. Now it's legally mine. Jeffrey left me everything, remember? My hands lay flat on the worn wooden table, steady despite the fire building in my chest. 3 generations of Wells men had sat at this same table, planned their days, shared their meals, raised their children. Jeffrey told me you'd have trouble accepting reality, she continued, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. He said you'd probably expect to live here forever, like some kind of charity case. My son never said that to me. Of course he didn't. Her laugh was sharp as breaking glass. He was too polite to hurt your feelings, but he told me plenty. She pushed off from the counter, beginning to pace around the kitchen like a lawyer addressing a jury. He said you'd been depending on him too long, that it wasn't healthy for a grown man to need his son's support at your age. Lies. Every word was fabricated poison, but delivered with such confidence that someone who didn't know Jeffrey might believe them. Look, I get it. Change is hard for old people. Her tone shifted to mock sympathy. But you need to understand something fundamental here. I own this house now, legally, completely. The deed, the mortgage, the property taxes, everything. The deed may have Jeffrey's name, but this land belonged to my grandfather, before Jeffrey was even born. Your grandfather didn't leave you anything, did he? She paused her pacing to stare at me directly. Face facts, Clyde. You're a charity case who's outlived his usefulness. The cruelty was breathtaking, but what struck me most was how much she was enjoying this. This wasn't just about property or money. She was savoring my apparent helplessness like fine wine. I want you out of here by tomorrow morning, she said, her voice rising with each word, and you'll take only what you can carry. No furniture, no family heirlooms, nothing that belongs to this house. I stood slowly, my arthritis making the movement deliberate and careful. Tomorrow morning, yes, and don't think about trying to claim anything belonged to your family originally. I have lawyers, Clyde, good ones. They'll tie you up in court until you're dead. For the first time since Jeffrey's funeral, I felt something that might have been a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. As you wish, Zella. The unexpected calmness in my voice seemed to catch her off guard. She'd been building toward an explosion, expecting rage or tears or desperate pleading. Instead, she got quiet acceptance. We moved from the kitchen through the dining room, past the mahogany table where Jeffrey had done his homework as a boy, into the front living room where family portraits lined the mantelpiece. Zella followed me with predatory energy, clearly energized by what she saw as complete victory. I've been patient with you, Clyde, but my patience has limits. She walked around the room touching furniture possessively, the antique sofa, the carved end tables, even the brass lamp that had belonged to Jeffrey's grandmother. This couch, these antiques, even that ugly family portrait, it's all mine now. Jeffrey chose every piece carefully, I said quietly, remembering how he'd spent months finding just the right coffee table to match his mother's decorating vision. Jeffrey's taste was as outdated as yours. Her fingers trailed over surfaces like she was appraising merchandise. I'm thinking modern minimalist for the redesign, maybe Scandinavian. Clean lines, light colors, no clutter. She was already erasing Jeffrey's memory, planning to gut everything that connected this house to its history. Here's what's going to happen, she continued, turning to face me with theatrical authority. You'll take your clothes, your medications, and leave. Nothing else belongs to you. Where exactly do you expect me to go? She shrugged, the gesture casual and devastating. Not my problem. Senior center? Trailer park? Maybe that friend of yours? What's his name, Obi? Maybe he'll let you sleep in his barn. I'm 65 years old, Zella. I've lived in this county my entire life. Then you should have planned better for your old age. Her smile was razor sharp. Maybe if you'd been a better father, Jeffrey would have left you something substantial instead of a box of rusty tools. The attack on my relationship with Jeffrey hit deeper than anything else she'd said. But before I could respond, she was just getting started. Jeffrey was a good son. He loved his family. Enough! The word exploded from her with startling violence. I'm sick of hearing about Jeffrey and his wonderful family and his precious memories. Her mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely. He's gone. And you know what? I'm glad, she was shouting now, her carefully styled hair coming loose, her makeup smudged with fury. Now I can finally live without pretending to care about this boring town and boring people and boring family traditions. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a fire. She'd never loved Jeffrey, had never loved anything about the life he'd built, the community he'd served, the family he'd cherished. Get out of my sight, she snarled, her voice dropping to pure venom. Go die in some gutter where you belong. Instead of the rage she clearly expected, I felt something close to peace settle over me. As you wish, Zella. Her eyes widened with confusion. What? You're not going to argue? Beg? Make some pathetic speech about family loyalty? No. I allowed myself a small smile. I'll just collect my things. You're just giving up. She seemed genuinely stunned by my calm acceptance. I'm respecting your wishes. You are, after all, the legal owner of this house. Why are you being so... She searched for the word. So agreeable. What would be the point of fighting? I started toward the stairs, moving with deliberate dignity. You've made your position very clear. She remained in the living room, watching me with suspicion and confusion. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected or wanted. Crushing someone was only satisfying if they fought back. I'll need about an hour to pack essentials, I said from the foot of the stairs. Take whatever fits in 2 suitcases. That's it. That seems fair. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling her eyes boring into my back. At the top, I paused and looked down at her. Will you be staying up to supervise? I'll be right here. Don't try anything clever. I chuckled softly, genuinely amused. At my age, what could I possibly try? As I disappeared into the upstairs hallway, I heard her pacing below, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. She'd gotten everything she wanted, but something about my reaction was bothering her. Good. Let her wonder. I left the Wells house at 6 in the morning, driving my old Ford pickup truck with everything I owned, packed into 2 battered suitcases. The sun was just breaking over the Texas horizon, painting the sky the color of fresh peaches as I pulled into the parking lot of the roadside inn on Route 35. 43 years in that Victorian mansion, and it came down to this, a 12 by 14 motel room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes. The polyester bedspread felt rough under my hands as I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at my single open suitcase. Everything I own now, 3 changes of clothes, my medications, Jeffrey's 3rd grade school photo, and the pocket watch that had belonged to my father. Not much to show for 65 years of living, but it would have to be enough. 18-wheelers rumbled past on the highway, shaking the thin walls. Morning traffic was building, folks heading to jobs, running errands, living their normal lives, while mine had been turned upside down in the space of 24 hours. Jeffrey, I said to his photograph, I hope you knew this day might come. The motel's coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the small room with the aroma of cheap grounds and hard water. I sat at the tiny table by the window, watching traffic flow past while methodically reviewing my situation. Homeless at 65. No income beyond Social Security. No family left except a woman who'd told me to die in a gutter. But something was nagging at me, had been nagging at me since yesterday's will reading. Jasper Thompson's meaningful look when he'd mentioned that additional clause. The way he'd nodded toward the kitchen during all the celebration. His professional demeanor hiding something that felt almost like anticipation. Jeffrey had been the smartest man I'd ever known. Built an empire from nothing, outmaneuvered competitors twice his size, always stayed 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Was it really possible that he'd leave his father defenseless against a woman he'd grown to distrust? I found Thompson's business card in my wallet and dialed his office number. My hands were steady, purpose replacing the grief and confusion that had clouded my thinking. Thompson Legal Services, Jasper speaking. Jasper, it's Clyde Wells. I need to speak with you. His tone shifted immediately, concern replacing professional courtesy. Clyde, where are you? I heard that Zella insisted you leave the house immediately. She threw me out last night, told me to go die on a trash heap, among other things. Sharp intake of breath on the other end. She said, What? You mentioned an additional clause in Jeffrey's will yesterday. I think it's time we discussed it. The pause stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Then Thompson's voice came back, filled with something that sounded remarkably like relief. Yes, it definitely is time. Can you see me this morning? Can you come to my office? Say 10 o'clock? I'm at the roadside inn on Route 35. I can be there in 20 minutes. Clyde, Thompson's voice carried a weight I couldn't quite identify. Bring everything Zella said to you last night. Every cruel word, every threat, every insult. Write it down if you need to. Why? What difference does it make now? Because Jeffrey anticipated exactly this situation. Satisfaction colored his words now. Your son was even smarter than you knew. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? 10 a.m. sharp. And Clyde, you might want to bring a change of clothes back to town. Something nice for when we pay Zella a visit. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone with the first real hope I'd felt since Jeffrey's diagnosis. Whatever my son had planned, whatever protection he'd built into his will, it was about to be revealed. I showered, put on my cleanest shirt, and prepared to discover just how well Jeffrey had known the woman he'd married. I arrived at Thompson's office exactly at 10, parking my old pickup beside his familiar sedan. Downtown Willow Creek looked the same as always. Brick storefronts, American flags hanging limp in the still morning air, folks going about their Tuesday business like the world hadn't shifted under my feet. Thompson's office occupied the second floor of the old merchant's building, Wood-paneled walls lined with law books and family photographs. Jeffrey's portrait hung behind the desk, a formal shot from when he'd won the county's Business Leader Award 3 years back. "Clyde, you look tired." Thompson stood up from his desk, genuine concern creasing his weathered face. "How are you holding up at that motel?" "I've had better accommodations, but I'm managing." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, noting how he seemed almost energized despite the early hour. "You seem almost pleased about something, Jasper." His grin was wider than I'd seen since Jeffrey's diagnosis. "Clyde, tell me, did you listen carefully to every word of the will reading yesterday?" "What do you mean?" "Zella got everything. The house, the money, the business. I got Jeffrey's old tools and some photographs." "That's what everyone thinks they heard." Thompson moved to the office safe, spinning the combination lock with practiced efficiency. "But sometimes the most important words are the ones people don't pay attention to." He withdrew a thick manila folder, handling it like precious cargo. "Your son was far more clever than Zella ever imagined." My pulse quickened as he laid the complete will on his desk, pages spread out like a roadmap to salvation. "Jasper, what are you not telling me?" Jeffrey knew exactly what kind of person he'd married. Thompson's finger traced down to the bottom of page 3. "Look here, section 15B, the fine print that everyone missed." I leaned forward, squinting at the legal text. The words swam into focus slowly, and when I understood them, my heart nearly stopped. "Read it aloud, Clyde." "The house and monetary assets transfer to my wife and Zella Marie Wells." I paused, processing the next phrase. "On the condition that she provides proper care and dignified housing for my father, Clyde Samuel Wells, until his natural death." The room went silent except for the tick of Thompson's desk clock. "Keep reading," he said quietly. "Should this condition be violated through eviction, verbal abuse, or failure to provide respectful treatment, the entire inheritance shall immediately revert to the Jeffrey Wells Cancer Research Foundation." My hands were shaking now. "Jasper, she threw me out. She told me to die on a trash heap." "I know she did." His satisfaction was unmistakable. "Because Jeffrey anticipated this exact scenario." "How could you possibly know what she said to me?" "Because your son instructed me to monitor the situation closely. He told me, Dad's going to need protection, and I won't be there to provide it." Thompson pulled out another document, a legal definition sheet. "The will specifically defines proper care as dignified housing, respectful treatment, and family consideration. Zella violated all 3 conditions within 36 hours. I felt tears building behind my eyes, grief and relief and overwhelming pride in my son's wisdom all mixing together. Jeffrey knew she would do this to me. "He loved you more than his own comfort, Clyde," he said. "Dad deserves better than I can give him while I'm fighting this cancer, but I can make sure he gets what he needs after I'm gone." The magnitude of it hit me like a physical blow. While fighting for his life, Jeffrey had been fighting for mine too. He'd seen through Zella's performance, anticipated her cruelty, and built legal protection around me like a fortress. "What happens now?" I asked, wiping my eyes with the handkerchief I'd carried for 40 years. Thompson was already gathering official papers, stamping documents with his notary seal. "Now we inform Mrs. Wells of her legal situation. The inheritance is null and void as of last night." "When do we tell her?" "This afternoon. Are you ready to face her again?" I straightened my shoulders, feeling strength return for the first time in days. Jeffrey's love was still protecting me, still fighting for me even from beyond the grave. More ready than I've been since this whole nightmare started. Thompson and I spent the lunch hour preparing copies of the complete will and legal transfer documents. By 3 o'clock, we were driving toward the Wells family home in his sedan, official papers organized in manila folders on the back seat. The Victorian house looked different somehow as we pulled into the circular driveway. Maybe because I now knew it didn't really belong to Zella, had never belonged to her, despite what yesterday's abbreviated will reading had suggested. Thompson rang the doorbell while I stood slightly behind him, holding the document folder. The sound of heels clicking on hardwood announced Zella's approach. "I'm not expecting anyone," she called through the door. When it opened, she appeared in casual clothes, designer jeans and a silk blouse, her hair in rollers like she'd been preparing for an evening out. The sight of me standing on what she considered her doorstep ignited immediate fury. "What are you doing here? I told you never to come back to this house." "Zella, we brought you something interesting," I said calmly. Thompson stepped forward with professional authority. "Mrs. Wells, we need to discuss your husband's will. There are some aspects you may have missed. The will was read yesterday. Everything's settled. You're both trespassing on my property." "Actually, ma'am, you may want to review the complete document before making that claim." Thompson extended the official copy toward her. Multiple pages, legal letterhead, raised seals. Clearly authentic legal documentation. She snatched it suspiciously. "What is this supposed to be?" "The full version of Jeffrey's last will and testament," I replied. "Not the abbreviated reading you heard yesterday." Zella scanned the first 2 pages, recognizing familiar text about charitable donations and personal items. Her confusion grew as she found everything matching her memory. "This looks the same as what you read before." "Keep reading," Thompson said quietly. "Page 3, section 15B. I watched her face carefully as she found the section, watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. Her hands began trembling as she read Jeffrey's protection clause. "This is fake!" She screamed the words, spittle flying from her mouth. "This clause wasn't in the original will." "Yesterday you didn't listen to the complete reading," I said. "You were too busy planning your celebration." "You forged this. You added this section after Jeffrey died." Thompson's voice remained professionally calm. "Ma'am, I assure you this document is completely authentic. The original is in my office safe, witnessed and notarized according to Texas state law." "I want to see the original. This is fraud. This is impossible." She examined every page frantically, looking for signs of tampering, alterations, anything to support her desperation. But Thompson was meticulous. Every seal was authentic, every signature verified, every legal detail perfect. "Proper care and housing for my father," she read aloud, her voice dropping to a whisper as the reality began penetrating her shock. "You violated that condition approximately 36 hours ago," Thompson informed her, "when you evicted Mr. Wells and told him to, quote, die on a trash heap. This can't be legal. There must be some mistake, some loophole." I stepped forward, feeling Jeffrey's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. "No mistake, Zella. My son knew exactly who you were." She looked between Thompson and me, understanding finally dawning in those cold blue eyes. The calculation, the planning, the legal trap, it had all been laid months before Jeffrey died. "He planned this," she whispered. "He actually planned this whole thing." "Perhaps we should discuss the legal implications inside," Thompson suggested. "This is a neighborhood after all." Zella nodded mechanically, stepping back from the doorway. Yes, come in." As we crossed the threshold into what had been my home for 3 years, I couldn't help observing how quickly the power dynamic had shifted. Yesterday, Zella had been the righteous property owner. Today, she was about to learn that ownership was far more complicated than she'd imagined. We gathered in the same living room where yesterday's will reading had taken place, but everything felt different now. Zella collapsed into the wingback chair she'd claimed as her throne, while Thompson and I took positions near Jeffrey's photograph on the mantelpiece. "Mrs. Wells, according to Section 15B of your husband's will, you have violated the inheritance conditions." Thompson's voice carried the weight of legal finality. "The entire estate, house, and monetary assets now transfers to the Jeffrey Wells Cancer Research Foundation." "This can't be happening." Zella's voice was barely above a whisper, her hands covering her face. "This can't actually be happening. By evicting Mr. Wells and telling him to die on a trash heap, you've nullified your claim to the inheritance. The will specifically requires dignified treatment and respectful housing. But I didn't mean it literally. It was just, I was angry. People say things when they're angry." Thompson consulted his legal notes. "The document specifies that verbal abuse constitutes grounds for inheritance forfeiture. Intent is irrelevant under Texas law." I settled into Jeffrey's favorite recliner, the leather chair where he'd spent his final months, too weak from treatments to work. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yesterday I'd been homeless. Today I was home. "Now we need to discuss living arrangements," I said quietly. Zella looked up, confusion mixing with her despair. What do you mean? This is still the Wells family home. It always was. I gestured toward the family portraits lining the mantelpiece. The foundation has agreed to let me remain as permanent resident. Thompson nodded confirmation. Mr. Wells has been granted lifetime residency rights as part of the inheritance transfer. You can stay too, Zella, but under my rules now. What? What kind of rules? Her voice was small, defeated. Respect, basic human decency, and never again suggesting that anyone should die on a trash heap. I kept my tone level, without vindictiveness, the same courtesy I would have shown you. What if I apologize? Desperation crept into her voice. What if I take back everything I said? The legal violation has already occurred, Thompson explained. The inheritance transfer is irreversible under the will's terms. I leaned forward, studying the woman who'd tried to destroy me less than 48 hours ago. Jeffrey knew this day would come. He protected both of us. Both of us. You get a roof over your head and dignity. I get the same. The foundation provides living stipends for both residents. I touched Jeffrey's photograph gently. My son was wiser than either of us realized. I lost everything. Zella's whisper was broken, defeated. Everything I planned, everything I dreamed. You lost everything you tried to steal, I corrected. There's a difference. Thompson packed his documents efficiently, professional satisfaction evident in his movements. I'll file the transfer papers tomorrow morning. The foundation assumes legal ownership by Friday. Jeffrey gave me something more valuable than money, I said, straightening my son's photograph on the side table. Zella looked up. What's that supposed to mean? Justice, and the knowledge that he truly loved me. My voice caught slightly. He told me in the hospital, Dad, I took care of you. I didn't understand what he meant then. Your son spent months crafting this protection, Thompson added. He anticipated exactly what might happen and built legal safeguards around it. As Thompson prepared to leave, I felt a deep sense of completion. Jeffrey's love had transcended death itself, reaching forward through legal documents to shield me when I needed it most. Zella, you can stay as long as you follow house rules, I said as Thompson gathered his briefcase. Treat people with respect. Contribute to the household peacefully. Remember that this is a home, not a hotel. She nodded numbly. What choice do I have? The same choice you gave me 2 days ago. But I'm not you. Thompson shook my hand at the front door. Justice has been served, Clyde. Jeffrey would be proud. As his car pulled away, I returned to the living room where Zella sat staring at the wall. For the first time since Jeffrey's death, we were alone together as equals, two people dependent on the same charity, living under the same roof, bound together by circumstances neither of us could change. We'll find a way to live together respectfully, I said. I'm sorry, she whispered, about what I said, about everything. Sorry is a start. Respect is what matters going forward. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 o'clock, marking time in a house that now belonged to neither of us, and both of us. Jeffrey's final gift wasn't just justice. It was the possibility of redemption, even for those who didn't deserve it. Outside, Texas afternoon light streamed through the windows my late wife had chosen, illuminating family photographs that would remain on these walls long after Zella and I were gone. The Wells family home would endure, protected by love that reached beyond the grave. Some victories are worth waiting for. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.